Controversy has struck the world of Formula One once again, as Max Verstappen might actually be on the verge of losing his first championship title, merely days after winning his second. And with the FIA's report confirming Red Bull's breach of the cost cap, the entire paddock's been thrown into utter chaos. In this video, we're going to talk about these shocking revelations and their potential penalties. So let's dive straight into it. First off, Red Bull denies cost cap allegations. It's been a strange couple of weeks for Red Bull, from the highs of winning their first Constructors' Championship in almost a decade to the lows of all these cost cap allegations. They've seen it all. But despite the FIA confirming everyone's suspicions about a budget regulation breach last season, the energy drink outfit isn't ready to accept the loss just yet. In a statement issued right after the Sporting Authority's verdict, Red Bull said that their 2021 submission was well below the cost cap limit, so they need to carefully review the FIA's findings, as according to them, they haven't done anything wrong here. In fact, if anything, they're surprised and disappointed by the report. At the same time, though, this whole saga didn't just pop out of nothing. Like, rival teams have had suspicions over their spending for a while now, and a formal investigation was always bound to happen at some point. After all, something like this can have massive ramifications, not only for Red Bull, but for the rest of the grid as well. For instance, Max Verstappen clinched his first title on the last lap of the last race in 2021, which, by the way, is the year that's being examined. So if there's any solid evidence that the team gained an unfair advantage over the competition by spending more money than they're allowed, then it's pretty much game over. No, we're not joking. The Flying Dutchman could actually end up losing his title, which would automatically promote Lewis Hamilton to his 8th World Championship. Up next, the FIA's ruling is very vague. It's not surprising to see the paddock turning into a war zone after this announcement. Like, people are still bitter about the way last season ended and aren't ready to accept Verstappen's title win. So if there's any chance of finding any flaws in Red Bull's plan or the legality of their car, everyone's obviously gonna pounce on it. That said, the FIA's ruling is actually incredibly vague about the whole situation, and it's pretty hard to extract any substantial information from it. For example, the statement says that Red Bull was considered to be in procedural and minor overspend breaches of the financial regulations in 2021. Now, that's a perfectly fine way of saying it, but the problem arises when the Sporting Authority fails to elaborate any further. Minor overspending, for instance, means that they went over the budget cap by less than 5%, which sounds clear enough. At the same time, you've got to remember that this number could range anywhere from $500,000 to $11 million. And at that point, it does get big enough to actually have an impact on the car's production and its pace on track. Plus, since the championship fight was so close last season, there's no reason to believe why this extra cash wouldn't have been the difference maker in the end. The FIA did mention in its statement, though, that they're currently looking at potential options for sanctions or penalties. That said, those would probably have to be implemented at a later unannounced date. What's more, Brundle weighs in on the situation. Even though it feels like we've reached the end game in terms of last season's controversy, this is actually only the beginning. And according to former F1 driver and commentator Martin Brundle, there's still much to play out. Speaking in an interview with Sky Sports, he said that it's absolutely crazy to consider 5% of the total budget a minor breach, since that sort of money is more than enough to upgrade your car. So the first thing that the FIA needs to do is to crack down hard on any minor breaches, so no other team can think that they can spend an extra $10 million to get the upper hand. After all, these things can really be the difference between winning a world title and coming second. On top of that, the rules need a bit more clarity because right now, everything's just too speculative. And last but not least, the brackets also need to be much smaller. Like 5% is just too wide to make any accurate guesses as to whether the extra money improved the car or not. Oh, and then there's the issue of Aston Martin's breach as well, which, according to the FIA, is of a procedural nature. Now, there's a slight issue with that statement, as almost no one knows what that actually means. Did they submit incomplete documents, or did they miss any deadlines? We're not quite sure. All we know is that they didn't actually overspend like Red Bull. Not to mention, it taints Red Bull's title win. Formula One is a fickle sport, as you can go from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows in absolutely no time. And with Max Verstappen at risk of losing his first championship, it's definitely left a sour taste across the entire team. Like, even if the FIA proceeds to not do anything about it and just give them a reprimand, the title will forever be shrouded in controversy. But even more importantly, this verdict just shows the team principal, Christian Horner, in a bad light. For instance, when initial reports about a potential cost cap break started to surface last month, both the Mercedes and Ferrari bosses complained. In fact, Toto Wolff even went on record to say that Red Bull should be punished if they have somehow overstepped the regulations to gain an unfair advantage. And that time, nothing was actually proven, so Horner seemed absolutely livid at the audacity of these allegations. In fact, in an interview with BBC Radio 4, he said that he was shocked at the speculation and accusations that other teams have made. So now that he's been proven false by the official ruling, it's going to be very hard to trust anything that comes out of his camp. And the longer this saga continues to play out, the more convoluted the whole thing's gonna be. Let's look at the cause of Red Bull's overspending. Alright, so there's been a lot of speculation about where this extra 5% money was spent during the 2021 season. And while people have been pointing fingers at the car's development, some other reports suggest otherwise. So what did they spend their money on? An extra front wing? Well, they did technically spend on wings, just not the kind that goes on their car. Instead, food and catering were presented as the sole reason behind the cost cap breach, which honestly is hilarious. At the same time though, this doesn't actually mean anything, because we're sure that Red Bull could have easily overspent on the development only to squeeze the catering budget and divert the attention over there. Other than that, there's also some speculation about their chief technical officer, Adrian Newey's salary. Why? Well, you see, the top 3 personnel and the drivers within the top 3 teams aren't a part of the cost cap. But the issue is that Red Bull didn't exactly hire Newey directly and paid him through another enterprise. And that would have been perfectly fine had he not been the guy to literally design their whole car. Like, you see the problem here, right? So there's definitely something fishy going on here. Finally, what sort of penalty could Red Bull get? Now, the FIA has laid out a list of potential penalties that apply to any minor financial breach in the sport, meaning that any of these could be handed out to Red Bull. Plus, when the new rules were introduced, the F1 boss said that there'd be serious repercussions if any team tried to overstep its limits. Whether he fulfills his promise or not is another question. Let's start with the first penalty, though, which is just a simple fine determined on a case-by-case basis. And judging by how things are going, this one seems the most likely. Oh, and then there's a reprimand as well, which again is very mild. That being said, things do start to get interesting, as the next 2 options are, of course, a deduction of points from either the Constructors' Championship or Drivers' Championship. Obviously, these are probably the harshest of the bunch, as one of these could result in them losing a world title. Then again, the FIA wouldn't want to take away Verstappen's title, as it'll only spark more controversy. Another route they could choose is to suspend Red Bull from 1 or more qualifying sessions for next season, or they could also reduce the team's aerodynamic testing capabilities, which would definitely throw a spanner in the works for their 2023 plans. And finally, there's the obvious option of reducing their cost cap for the future, which is arguably one of the more likely and fitting penalties on the list. What do you think, though? Can Red Bull walk away from these allegations unscathed? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.